meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. I have Jamie Bartlett with me on the podcast today, and I want to tell you a little bit about her before I bring her on. But Jamie is married to her husband, Mike. They have been married since 2005. They have 4 biological boys and 1 daughter through adoption, and another adoption happening soon or in the works. I don't know if soon is the
soon in the works. Right?
Yeah.
All of it.
And you guys have been foster parents to 18 others. Mm-hmm. That's incredible. You and your husband also started a church plant in Grand Rapids, Michigan about 12 years ago, and that's where you are today. Mm-hmm. And as part of your role with the church, you get to serve in a group of agency workers, church ministry leaders, and bridge organizations that collaborate together to serve the child welfare community in your area. And what I'm particularly excited about is that you recently teamed up with us to receive more training. Mm-hmm. And when this episode airs, you will officially be launched as a TFI Advocate.
Oh, that's exciting.
That is exciting.
Aww.
We're so thankful. So welcome to the show, Jamie. So happy to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you. It's just a joy to be here. So thank you for the invite.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we're actually going to talk about a topic that I really know nothing about, and I'm very excited to learn. It's refugee foster care. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing some of my listeners are well acquainted with this, and I'm guessing many are not as well. Sure. So we're going to dive right in. First of all, just like, what is this? How did you even learn about it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, you know, when we even started talking about foster care, thinking about it, I knew nothing about refugee foster care. So I have learned a lot as we have gone on. But what really introduced me to it was a good friend that I had who worked in a group home for refugee girls. Many who were not able to return to their home countries, so were going to be in the U.S. for a long time. And one girl in particular was getting ready to turn 18. And at that point, they can't stay in the group home. They have to transition out. And they didn't have anywhere for her to go. And so my friend just started talking to me about this girl, like, we don't know what we're going to do. She's from Honduras. She crossed the border because she had to. And so in that, just learning about one person, I was like, tell me more about what this looks like and what this is. And so, you know, refugee foster care can look very different. There's a few different lanes, so to speak, for it. There's kids that cross over the border from Mexico into the U.S. from Central America, some from Brazil or countries like that come up through the border. And when you hear their stories, they're just heartbreaking. They were running from gang violence, severe abuse from their families, extreme poverty. And so that's how some kids enter refugee foster care is through that. They're apprehended at the border, and when the government looks deeper into their story, realize that they can't return home safely. And so then are placed in foster care. And so that's one way. And then another way is from direct placements from refugee camps from a lot of different countries in Africa, Afghanistan, anywhere where there's a lot of just instability and kids in refugee camps. The government will try to place as many of them as possible into foster care with families. And so we've gotten referrals. It is so interesting because, you know, this is a specific person, 15-year-old girl in the Ivory Coast in Africa. She's been separated from her family, has nowhere to go. And as soon as a foster family says yes, they prepare that girl to then travel to the U.S. So it's just really interesting and heartbreaking. right? Because you're experiencing, even just a small degree of what they have gone through. And then,
so let me interrupt real quick, because when you said like a child might be from the Ivory Coast, but then they would travel to the U.S., explain that more. So they're not here necessarily.
Right. Yeah. At that
Am
point,
I hearing
they're
that
not.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yes. Yeah. At that point, they're not. They're still in the refugee camp. And they are essentially, they're at the refugee camp. And so essentially they're just waiting there until a family says yes.
Oh, and so, boy.
Right.
Wow.
Isn't that heavy to know that your yes, as all foster families experience when they get a phone call, right? It just feels very heavy making the decision, because you know that your yes, dramatically impacts their lives.
Because again, you said this, but these kids, it's already been determined by the government that it is not safe for them to return home.
Mm-hmm, correct. Yeah. So at that point, you're not playing a role in making that decision. It's already been determined based on a number of factors, that they need to remain in the United States for their own safety. And at that point, they just need a place for these kids to go.
And is that essentially they're going to be fostered until they age out?
Until they age out. Yep. So
is there options for adoption?
Not typically. I mean, we have an anomaly in our story of an adoption, but typically, because there's not the ability to go through the same kind of legal proceedings there are in domestic foster care in terms of termination of parental rights. They're not able to do that when families are in other countries, and then oftentimes not even in places that are easily accessible. And so they're just considered long-term foster care placements.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they age out. So they have the option of remaining in foster care until they turn 21.
21. Okay. Mm-hmm. Are there any specific countries that you have seen greater needs for with this?
Yeah. I mean, certainly Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico. Those are primarily the kids that we have had just within our own family. But there was in other countries, it very much fluctuates based on the countries that are experiencing the most turmoil. So when refugee foster care started, it was essentially, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Lost Boys of the Sudan, but where there was this mass exodus, if I understand correctly, the origins of how refugee foster care started, at least in Michigan, where we are. It was through that. So they had a whole crew of boys come from the Sudan to be placed in the United States long term. And so just a couple years ago, a lot of kids came from Afghanistan who had been separated from their families. So Burma is another one where there were a large number of kids resettled into the U.S. in foster families. So it really can. Ethiopia is another one where there's some, there have been some. The Congo. So wherever there's just extreme, unrest, and kids have been separated, you tend to see it come in trends. Several kids from the same country, referrals come in.
Interesting. So I'm thinking, one of our sons we adopted from Guatemala, and I know that in the process of after his mom, made that choice for him, he was put in a foster home until we came, until all the paperwork, all the court. So I know there's some level of foster care, at least there was, that many years ago. So is that ever an option that kids go back to their country if there's foster care in their country, or because they were okay?
And I think there's a lot more intentionality around all of that, particularly with now, international adoptions just not happening that much because part of that is really good. They're finding families within their own country and culture to care for them. So I think as much as possible that is explored. But I think also kids, particularly the ones that we have had, even their extended family is just difficult, and they don't have the resources to know. And some countries don't even have the infrastructure for kids to really know, who can I go to for this?
Right.
So one of our girls' stories is that her, essentially her school counselor helped her arrange travel to get to the U.S. because there were no safe options anywhere in the vicinity for her. And the abuse was so extreme that when she disclosed it, when her school counselor learned about it, that was the best option, which is so hard for us to fathom, that this really dangerous, treacherous trek to the U.S. is sometimes the best option for kids. It's hard to even process that.
I mean, it just adds so many levels of complexity on top of already so much complexity for our kids in the U.S. that are in foster care. Now you're talking about an absolutely totally different country, language, everything. Like there's not one.
Everything is so different.
One thing.
I know. They lose everything. And not by their choice. I know, refugee work can sometimes be viewed politically and all of that. But it's like when we have interacted with all of our kids, without fail, would all have stayed in their countries if they could have. And they grieve that. They grieve the loss of culture and familiarity and smells and all the things of quote unquote home that bring us comfort. It takes them a really, really long time to start feeling even the slightest bit of home in the U.S.
Wow. Okay. So you keep mentioning that you have brought some children in, or you've had some children. How did this all get started for you? How did, just tell us your story into this world.
Yeah. I mean, it really started with the one yes of the girl who didn't have anywhere to go when she turned 18 and transitioned out of this group home. At that point, we were living in a tiny house. We had 4 boys. There was no extra space. My husband and I got away for like our 10th anniversary. We were walking the beaches in South Florida. And I just said to him, I cannot stop thinking about this girl, that they're trying to find a home for and doesn't have a place. And he was like, I wondered if you were going to bring that up on this trip. And I said, I am. And I said, what would you think about that? And he was like, well, we'd have to move. We have 0 bedrooms. I said, I know. And he said, let's do it. So after we returned from that, our trip from Florida, we got our house ready to sell. We found a house that had 2 more bedrooms than our current house had. And so that 3. We ended up making it 3 more bedrooms.
Nice.
And it did only have 2, but, and so we moved, and 6 weeks later, that first girl moved in.
Wow.
And that was, 8 years ago. So,
okay. So what was that like?
It was surreal. I remember meeting her for the first time, and my heart just loved her. I didn't know her full story, obviously, but I knew enough that she had just been through a lot. And so my heart was for her just from the beginning. And she and I still have the sweetest relationship. But I just knew that I would do anything for her, and not that I would ever replace her mom or her family, but that I just wanted to be there for her and what she needed. So,
wow. How was she in those early days?
Very shy. She didn't open up a lot in the beginning. And I just remember thinking in my head, I will match her pace. I don't need this to go fast. I don't need to outpace her where she's at. And so it was just these small baby steps over a long period of time. She ended up living with us for several years. And now it's so different.
when she tells me all the things that are happening and all that's going on. But it takes a long time to build trust, especially
Yes.
as you know, with kids that have gone through hard things. It takes a long time, and that's okay. We have to be patient, I think. And that's what I kept reminding myself, like, to be patient with the process. I knew she could trust me, but she didn't know that.
Right.
And so and our kids were a huge gift in that. Like, little kids are disarming. And she has even said multiple times, seeing the kind of mom that you were to your kids helped me trust you. As she just watched me parent, and not that it looked perfect. It was a circus. I have four boys. And at that point, they were really little.
Yeah.
But she, I think, was able to see a healthy family. Not perfect family, but a healthy family.
Right. Yep. Very different.
And so that was, very different. Yeah. She saw me apologize. She saw me lose my mind, but then work through it. And so it was just a really sweet process with her.
I love that. Well, and she was the beginning.
Foster mama.
Yeah, she was your first, and she was your first yes. But there's been many yeses since. And
there have
they all been this refugee foster care?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. So each individual story, each individual journey, and how they got to the United States. There's also like a third part for refugee foster care, and that's kids who have been separated from their families, but there's plans to reunify. So the government has enough pieces in place to know that this is a safe situation for the kids to return home. And so sometimes all that's needed is a temporary foster home while they're working on reunification, either in their home country, or if their family is able to travel to the U.S., the government will. It just happened with one of our good friends who had a boy from Afghanistan for over a year, but the government was able to relocate his whole family here, and so he just went back with his family in Michigan, in our area, but now his whole family is here, and so there's opportunities for some temporary care in that too. So most of our kids have been with us for periods of years, but often our agency will say, hey, we really need some temporary homes to fill in for the next 2 months because we have a lot of kids who will be reunified. Can anybody step in just for a temporary basis? And so we've had probably 5 of those cases as well, where the kids have gone home.
Okay. And
those are so sweet.
Yeah, that's so sweet. Wow. And you've also mentioned that you've adopted one and are in the process of adopting another. And you said that's an anomaly. So talk more about that and how that has become part of your story.
Yes. I remember in our training, our licensing process, somebody asked that, like, does this ever go to adoption? And they were like, no, hardly ever, because of the complexity of the situation. And so I just didn't even have that on my radar. I'm like, we'll be long-term foster parents, or we'll be short-term foster parents. We'll just step in as needed. And so we were a few years into being foster parents at this point, and they reached out to me about a girl. She was just newly 17, and she was living in a group home for refugee girls, the same one. We developed like this partnership with this group home of getting their girls. And so it was, again, from this group home. And they said her situation is unique because she just lost her dad. She had lost her mom when she was really little. She's from Honduras. And she hadn't lived with her dad for many, many, many years, almost a decade. She kind of survived on the streets of Honduras before she journeyed to the U.S. Very complex relationship with her dad. But she still kept up with him, and then he had tragically died in a motorcycle accident, just maybe a few days before they reached out to me about her. And they said that her judge really wanted her in a family, because the judge was like, no child should be grieving the loss of both of their parents in a group home. And so find her a foster family. As we have learned, as we've gone on, there's not a whole lot of families that say yes to teenagers. And so they were like, we know you have a lot of kids already, which we did. And they said, but would you be willing to meet her? We can't, the judge said we can't keep her in the group home because she's grieving and she needs just a family to be with right now. And I said, okay, of course I'll meet her. Like my husband was like, at that point he was willing to ride the roller coaster with me. Like, go meet her. Oh my gosh, she's been through so much. And so I met her at a coffee shop. Her caseworker brought her, and I will never forget it. I will probably get choked up talking about it, but I sat across from her, and she was so at that point shut down, understandably so. But she just had such cold eyes, and now that I understand trauma a little bit more, like she was processing so much. But when I sat down, I just said, I'm Jamie. I'm so sorry for all that you've gone through. I'm so happy to meet you. And she didn't say anything other than like, I don't want to be adopted, was her first thing out of her mouth to me.
Wow.
And because she knew her judge was trying to do that. And I just said, I can understand that. Like you're grieving the loss of your parents. And I said, I would never, ever force that upon you, ever. And I said, we don't have to talk about it ever again. I said, we just want to be a support to you and what you're going through. And she said, well, I just turned 17. They say I have to live with a family until I'm 18. And then on my 18th birthday, I want to move out. I want to be on my own. I said, that's fine. I said, we will help you between now and then. Just get those steps that you need to do that. And she said, fine. She said, because I have no choice, I will say yes. And I was like, great. Now we have this like girl who's going to feel like held captive in her home and all of that. And so I was like, again, like just God, like reminding me, like slow down, match your pace. And that's all you have to do. And so that was what I went into it with, that expectation. She's going to live with us for a year. She had another girl that had moved in with us from the group home. And so this girl was like, we can share a bedroom. That's how we can make it work. Because we did like a family huddle of like, all right, we've got another kid coming in. Where do we put her? And so she was like, I'll share my room. That's totally fine. She needs to come with us. And so it became like a whole whole family ordeal, right? And so she moved in, and she would hardly come out of her room at all. And I remember just being like, that's okay. Like she's processing so much, match her pace. And then a couple months after she moved in, she got sick with a cold, and I just brought her tea. I just knocked on the door and I said, I'm so sorry you're not feeling good. Here's some tea. And that meant a lot to her. And I could see just small glimpses of softening. And then her caseworker came over one day, and she's like, all right, this is the third time. The last time you have to sign this paper saying you don't want to be adopted. Your judge just wanted you to sign it 3 times. And so she came over like, woohoo, we finally reached this last point where you can just sign it and be done with this whole thing. And I was in the kitchen, and they were in our dining room, and I could see through the door. And at that point, I was not even thinking anything. I was like, okay, great. This is her third time. Then she can like just move on with her life, right? And she grabbed the pen, and then she just stopped. And I was watching, and I was like, oh, my word. And she just looked at her caseworker, and she said, like, what if I don't want to do this?
Oh, my goodness.
And then she looked over at me, and she was just like, what if I changed my mind? And, she's like, would you let me be a part of your family?
Oh, my goodness.
It was just like, oh, my word. It was not on my radar. So I, of course, just start ugly crying, right? And I was just like, of course. And then it was just the sweetest moment, right? Where she just let me hug her. And it was like one of the sweetest moments of my entire life. And then I had to quick text Mike, my husband. Well, and he was just the same. He was like, oh my gosh, of course. Like no brainer. Of course. We will adopt her. And it was just sweet for me in that moment of like, this is her choice and she's choosing. And I just felt so, I think, honored to just be with somebody she chose.
Totally. Wow.
And so it was just really sweet. And so, you know, the caseworker was like, oh my word, I've got to call the judge. Like, she's never going to believe that all of this is happening, right? So it's this big celebration. And so I'm like, all right, great. We're going to move towards adoption. It's going to be in a few months. And then one morning she didn't come out of her room for school. And I just was like, where is she? And our other girl she was sharing the room with was like, I can say nothing. I'm so sorry. I can say nothing. And I was like, what? And it just was so disorienting for me in that moment to be like, wait, she's not here. And so I started texting our girl just to say, hey, are you all right? Like, I'm just concerned. You're not here. Are you okay? And she just said, I can't right now. I'm not in Michigan anymore.
Oh my.
And I was like, oh my gosh, how long have you been gone? What have I missed? You know, you're not in the Michigan. What time did you leave? I'm like, I'm a deep sleeper. And I apparently slept through the whole thing. She arranged for someone to come pick her up in the middle of the night and drive her. So she was hours away by that point. And I said, where are you? Where's your final, do you know where you're going? And she's like, yeah, to New York City. It's big. You'll never find me. And I was like, okay. And so many thoughts are going through my mind. Are you safe? Who the heck are you with?
Right.
What's the plan? You know, all these things. And I was just like, okay, she's in like high flight mode.
Right.
And so I knew not to send her a lot of questions. I knew, and that's just the spirit, right? Because the mom inside of me wants to flip out.
Yeah.
And all of that. And I was like, just that discernment from the spirit of like, she's in flight mode. Like, and so all I said was, I'm so glad that you are keeping me, like, you're communicating with me. Please just keep that going. I'm here for you. I love you. But in all of that, the agency workers are flipping out. Her judge is flipping out. Like, we have to file a police report, you know, all of these things. And her caseworker was like, what do we do? And I was like, I just feel like we need to give her a couple days. Like, she's communicating with me. Like, if I asked her, oh, have you eaten dinner? You know, I was trying to ask these like neutral questions to not have her like shut down communication with me. And I'm like, just give her a couple days. Give her a couple days. And so in that, I mean, thankfully, just by like God's grace, a couple days later, she said, I'm ready to come back. Wow. And I said, okay. She's like, I'm going to get some kind of job and I'm going to save enough money for a bus ticket back. I really want to come home. And I just said, I'm like, I will. I'll be on the next flight. Like, you know, I have to save money. Like, we want you back. I'll come get you. And so again, like, Mike, watch the kids. I'll be back in a little while. And he was just God knew who to put me with. He was like, all right, I got it. All is under control. You go do what you need to do. And so I jumped on a flight. It was like a red-eye flight. And, I got to New York City, and not only is it a nutty airport, but at this point it was under construction. And so, I mean, nothing is where it should be. There's like tarps everywhere. Like, where on earth? How am I going to find her? And I remember seeing her from like a distance. And like, it was just one of those moments where I was like, oh my gosh, God, like, so aware, right, of how he feels as a father to us, like seeing us from a long way off, right? And so I got to her and she just said, like, I can't believe that you would come for me, that this was my fault. And in that moment, I was just, that was all happening. But at the same time, I'm like, God, you came for me.
Yeah.
Like, like my life was my fault. And yet God saw us from a long way off and came running. And I just felt that so strongly in that moment. And I just said, I'm like, I'm not coming as your rescuer. Like, I have been rescued by God. Like, and he loves you, and he has put his love for you in my heart. And I couldn't be home when I knew you were ready to come back. And so it was such a powerful moment. And so we made it back to Michigan, and our judge wanted to see her literally like the next day. And so she was terrified. Our girl was so scared. And I'm like, it's all right. I'm going to be there. And her judge was like, as judges should be, a little scary. Their role is important.
Yeah.
And so, but like a little hard to approach. You just felt, you knew the gravity of her role. And so the judge comes in and she's like, tell me what happened. Like, what were you thinking? Kind of thing. And our girl was nervous and like tried to say stuff and, kind of fumble her way through the answer. And then the judge was like, Jamie, stand up. And I was like, okay. And she said, what should I do? She said, you were the one that was most inconvenienced with this. You were inconvenienced emotionally. You were inconvenienced with your time because you had to go get her. You were inconvenienced financially. What would you like me to do? And I said, I'm like, I want you to give her grace. I said, she has been navigating so many emotions. She understandably couldn't process everything that was happening. And I said, I would ask that you give her grace. And again, just this gospel glimpse of Jesus is our advocate, like pleading for grace. It was so profound. And in that moment, I'm just like, couldn't hardly keep it together because I just got this glimpse of, in a very small way, right? But a glimpse into Jesus and how he intercedes for us. And she looked at our girl and she said, and me, and she said, I don't often get asked to show grace in my role. And she said, so this moment is so profound for me. And she looked at her girl. She said, all is forgiven. Like, I will extend the grace that has just been requested, and all is forgiven. And she said, the next time I see you is going to be at your adoption hearing. And she said, and I cannot wait for that day. And we're all a mess, right? Like, she's crying, the court person's crying, the caseworker's crying. I mean, it was just such a powerful moment. And sure enough, the next time we were back in that courtroom was adoption day. Wow. And it was just surreal. And another thing she wrestled through was do I change my last name? And I said, you know what, that's your decision. Again, we want to meet you where you are, and you feel tied to your biological family. And I so understand that. And if you want to keep their name, that doesn't change what's happening. But a couple days before the date, she's like, I want to change my name. So there was that whole changing of last name, and our girl we all got to pound the gavel together, saying that the adoption was finalized. So all of our boys were in on that moment. She was, I was, Mike was, we're all holding this gavel together and just able to say, you're ours. One of the most meaningful, I think, moments of my life. So yeah, it's been, and that has, now I think it's 5 years, about 5 years, maybe less. I lose track of time. But just the sweetest relationship. She is such a delight and a joy, and she still grieves, especially when the days come around that she has to remember losing her parents. And that's all part of the process too. I said, that's okay. It's normal, and it's understandable that you would feel that. And what can we do to help comfort you? So it's been so sweet.
Wow.
Yeah.
I will never forget this story. This is, I could just weep.
I did for days, and I still do.
Yeah.
Whenever I think back, and it was probably a year after the adoption date, when you think, okay, adoption's happened, everything's fine. Mike and I were getting ready for bed one night, and she knocked on the door, and she had been working at an ice cream shop. And so she had been saving her money. I knew she'd been saving her money for a car or something, that she wanted. And she handed me the envelope full of cash. And she said, "Here, this is to repay you back for all that you've done." And I was like, oh my word, you have lived under that, feeling like you owe us. And I got to watch my husband, Mike, come over, put his arms or his hands on her shoulders and say, you owe us nothing. You are a gift to us and to our family. And again, gospel glimpse.
Right,
I'm like, we don't have to earn God's love. He loves us. We don't have to earn it. And I'm just in the background thinking, what the heck is happening as Mike is praying for her. And I'm just losing it. But just these, gospel glimpses are the best way that I have put it in my head, of just a window into God's love for us. And from there, she just seemed more secure in our love and in her role in our family. And she's just been a gift. We're very thankful for her.
That's so incredible. And it is just, as you keep talking about gospel glimpses, it so reveals the heart of God. And I think that the more we understand that we owe him nothing, but we have so much to thank him for, it brings such freedom. Like you said, she felt secure. I feel that so secure in the Lord, and so much freedom in the Lord, and so much gratitude in the Lord for the Lord,
For sure. Yes. And then your life just becomes worship, right? Of just,
you just want to serve him.
Yes. You have done all these things for us. I love you, and I will serve you and do what you've asked, do what you want me to do. And so, I think if anything, our journey has drawn me deeper to just knowing God's heart more and his love for us. And we have impacted the kids we've had, but the main gainer in all of this, I feel has been me. And that's what keeps us saying yes and continuing that journey. Because I'm if this is what God uses to teach me more about himself, then I'm all there.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
Yeah.
That is it. That is everything, that we delight more in him. We get to worship him more. We get to bring glory to him with our lives. And I just, what a gift, what a God we serve. And your story is so evident through this. And I just, this has been a holy moment, Jamie. I really feel that. And thank you for, man.
I knew I would try. Because it's so hard to talk about these things that are so tender.
Right.
And just so much just put his love for us on display.
Right.
And that has been a surprise. I wasn't anticipating going into this, growing in how much I would be that much more intimate with him, you know?
Right. So for our listeners, don't be afraid of the yes if it's in response to God saying, will you?
For sure. Yeah, it can be so scary. We just said yes to 2 new girls in the last year. And there's always a moment before they come where I'm like, what am I doing? What? But there's times we had said no too. And so I don't want to make it sound like every time is a yes, but when Mike and I are both on the same page, and it's often yes. But there are some no's. And I remember I was in my office, because now for the last couple of years, I've had a public role in foster care. So it has kind of moved to the next level in terms of just my involvement. So I was in my office, and one of our girls was coming the next day, and I was all sorts of nervous. And how is she going to respond? Even after, you can look back and be like, God has been with us. He will be with us. But yet there's all the emotions, right, that come with just nervousness of a new person and the impact that we'll have on everybody. And 2 of my coworkers, Jean and Judy, just said, Jamie, what a day it will be when you get to heaven and God shows you the full impact of all of these yeses. You just see what's right in front of you, but God sees for generations. And like just this long view of God will show you generations from now the impact of some of these yeses. And I was just like, whoa, that I hadn't really thought about it that much, especially in the beginning when I'm nervous about the yes. That was such an encouraging moment for me to remember God sees years from now, and we see what's right in front of us, but he knows what he's doing. And when he tells us to say yes, there is a lot of reason for that.
Right,
and
right.
Remembering God's character. And now I think of that often of like, yes, I want to get to heaven primarily to see Jesus, right? And be face to face and the veil taken away and just with him. But then one of those beautiful implications of that is we'll get to see all that he did in our lives. And I'm excited for that.
Wow. Jamie, thank you so much for sharing and being on today.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Your podcast has shaped me in so many ways. Just learning how to approach social workers, which I'm so excited to be, an advocate, TFI Advocate. The training has been so good. Just perspectives that I didn't always have or know about. I have benefited so much from your work and your podcast. So I'm just thankful to be here.
Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.